Oh, I got to promise Carolyn, since we talked about it last week, we're starting the show. Thumbs up. Yay. Oh, hey there. Welcome back to another episode of the Support Ops Hangout. I'm your host, Chase Clemens. This is a show that helps you deliver a better support experience to your customers. Before we jump into this week's topic, let's go ahead and meet the rest of the crew. So first up, the amazing Carolyn from Buffer. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited for this one.
It's going to be fun. I'm excited. Next up, the magnificent Chase Livingston from Automatic. How goes things?
It's going very well. Glad to be here.
And then the always amazing and magnificent and awesome and whatever else you want to throw in there, Jeff. Jeff is his Jeff, who is coming live to us from SupConf. What's up at SupConf?
It is awesome. They're doing a really, really great job. Great speakers, great venue here at the Automatic offices, and good Wi-Fi. I lost you there for a second, but I've been very impressed with the Wi-Fi so far.
See, that's really all you need. Like, for a good conference, you just need good Wi-Fi. That's it.
Yeah, and it's great to see a bunch of friendly faces, and people are really excited about this community. So it's very invigorating for sure.
I love it. And we're going to try to get this episode out on Tuesday morning, so there should be another full day of SupConf. If you're there while you're listening to this, then go ahead and find Jeff. Say hi, because he's going to be there somewhere, right?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. All right, cool. So it's the long-awaited part 2 of last week's episode. And by long-awaited, I mean we waited a week before we actually talked about this again. That's totally long enough. So look, your support team interacts with your customers more than anyone else in the team on a regular basis. So what happens when you on the support team know what your customers want, and you're trying to figure out a way to present that case to the development team? How do you do that? Should you do that? That's the topic for this one. We'll start with Carolyn, since she was really excited on this topic. And I think we need to split the show up in kind of 2 parts here. The first part being the core question, which is, are what customers want and what your product does, are those the same thing all the time? So I think that's kind of a good place to start and kind of question do you really know what they want, and do they know what they want? And then we'll tackle on the latter part, when that does match up, what's the best way to present the case to the team? So Carolyn, we'll start with you. So how do you know that what customers want are really what they want? You know, we've kind of touched on it a little bit before in the past, but how do you know when that lines up with what your product should do?
Yeah. So last week I argued, when we discussed bugs and pain points, I passionately declared and argued that the customer service team should be the loudest voice, and that they should absolutely be the ones who are feeding the information to the product teams, and that that should be like one of the, if not the most important piece in the decision about what to fix and when. I'm going to have a little bit of a different answer for this one. I had the same reaction that you did in your first question, Chase, which was like, well, this is making sort of a big assumption in this follow-up of like, how do you know what they want? And I often think back to Jeff. Jeff is famous for saying, like, if we just give customers what they want, we would end up with a product with like 400 check boxes to like do or not do whatever it is, the thing that they said, like, oh, this would just be so easy to just put like a checkbox in your settings. And we have one of those examples that I can go into if it's useful. But
I think we all have one of those examples.
I mean, I have 15 of those examples, but I have one like really, really on the top of my head that was so simple. It was supposed to be so simple, and like it was just supposed to be a checkbox, and then it like ended up wreaking havoc. So I feel like as opposed to on the like, this is what your product says it does, and it's not doing what it says it does, and here's why. Like, whereas the customer is like, the customer experience is absolutely king on that side. I think it's totally different on this other side, this sort of feature request side. And I think you did such a great job in the question of boiling down, like, if we understand that our product is here to help people make 3-inch holes and the customer is asking for a 3-inch drill bit, then great. And if they want, I don't actually know how drills work. But like, so this is going to be a tough example for you to like flesh out. But if those are aligned, then great. And if we are able to provide more context around decisions about that process, then great. But for the most part, in my experience, customers ask for things, and oftentimes those things are great, but like the things that they didn't know to ask for often are such more game changers for the product than what the customers have asked for. So in this one, I do feel like sometimes going off the path of what your customers are asking for is going to be a much bigger impact toward them being able to be successful with your product.
Yeah, Jeff, so kind of piggybacking on that, how do you're coming at this from the product side, plus having your customer support service background here. How do you know that your customers are trying to get that 3-inch hole and you've got a 3-inch drill bit? Like, how do you really know? Like, sometimes customers don't know what they need. Sometimes they have this, vague, like, oh, it would be really great if I could do this, but that's not really even touching the problem. So from the support side, how can you help the dev team, your development team, figure out like what customers really want?
Well, I think that's a great question. Before we get to the support side, I do think there's an element of this that's around, I don't know, like, communication is like the root of this, but it's also about like focus. And I think as a company and then also as a product team, you have to communicate what your focus is, and that there's times, like Carolyn was saying, when every little bit of detail should be communicated, because that's something that we're focused on as a company at the moment, and we need all the context that we can get. And there's other times where it's not about every little bit of detail. It's more about like, here's broadly what problems the customer is facing, and here's some examples of like specific use cases that fall into that need. So for example, if the company says that right now we really want to focus on so for Wistia, it would be like the analytics part of our product. I do want to hear about all the little, even though they're little and they're very specific, it's very helpful to hear about the specific use cases where the analytics part of our product works really well, or maybe doesn't, or how a customer is using it. And it's really important for me to communicate that need and that focus, and for it to change somewhat frequently, but with consistency. So that, I feel like that piece is really helpful. And that goes way, way, way back to early days when we were talking about when a customer writes in with a request, it's really important for customer support people to know what's on the roadmap, like what lines up with our ethos and our direction as a company versus what doesn't. Because so many times you're like the salesperson and you're having to say, oh, that's great that you want a 3-inch hole, but actually we don't. That's not what we sell. That's never what we're going to sell. So I hear you on the request. It's probably best if you go check out that company around the corner. That's what they actually sell. So I feel like all of that kind of ties in here. But for me, let's say, okay, so the two cases are, you're working on something, you're getting feedback on something that's very specifically what the rest of the company is focused on right now. Detail is so helpful, like asking the questions around the specific use case and really understanding that are really helpful. Let's say it's something that seems tangential, but in the future, it's not something we're focused on right now, but it's part of what the general customer need is, the general customer problem is. It's really helpful to try to put on that like interviewer hat and take a step back from their specific use case and ask questions around like, why is that really important to you? And can you tell me a little bit more about how you're solving that problem right now? Something like that. And as a support person, you're like, you're like a user, you're taking on a user research hat, like a persona research hat, and you're sharing some of what you learned around like, hey, I know we're not working on this right now, but I thought I would share that someone was trying to export our reports, and it's really important to them to do that because they have to present that to their boss. And right now they're doing a couple hours, a week of putting together these reports. So context is really important, but I think depending on that context, the support person still has a huge role to play for sure.
Yeah, and that's one of those too where it's a prime example from Basecamp today. We had a customer that was looking to add in the neighborhood of 1,500 people in bulk to a single project. 1,500 people on a project, that's not a project anymore. That's something else. Something new is going on there. So the feature request was real simple. It was, hey, I want to bulk import. Well, I can import 1,500 people to a project. But the real problem going on there was that they were trying to get announcements out to everybody and thought that they could do it through a Basecamp project. And that's not really a great kind of tool to use for a situation like that, not at 1,500 people. So it was on us to go, all right, well, we know exactly what you want, but we don't think that we're going to be a good fit right here. And yeah, while your idea is great, we're not going in that direction. So, we're not going to like bump it up to management and have them give you a different answers or anything like that.
Right. I just think walking through that scenario that we were laying out before, if doing some sort of like, if expanding to larger organizations and larger use cases was something that Basecamp as an organization was focused on and as a product team was currently working on, hearing something like, hey, bulk import is super important to these customers who want to add, 1,000 plus people, then it's like, great, let's hear all about it. Let's get, a Basecamp project actually started where people can fill out similar use cases so we can understand how frequently this is happening. But it sounds like in this case, it's like not only does it not align with what we're doing right now, if we dig into the use case a little bit, it doesn't line up at all with where we're going as a company. And it's probably a really positive thing as a support person to get back to them and say, like, we're probably not the right fit for you. There's probably like products like Gmail that you should use for that.
Yeah. And I think that when you're saying no like that, that's the key. It's we're not, but hey, here's this. So you're not like the end of the road. It's like you're a rest stop or a whatever on the road to getting them to the right fit. Yeah, rest stop is probably not the best example. You're like a hardware store that's selling 3-wrench drills anyway. So Chase Livingston, when it comes to Automatic, with lots of Jetpack customers out there, when you do know that this is something that your Jetpack customers want, you know exactly how to give it to them, and to fix whatever problem they're talking about. How do you convey that onto the rest of the dev team? How do you make sure that you pitch both a problem and a solution and then get it over to them?
Yeah, so that can happen really in a number of different ways. It could be as simple as a Slack conversation. If it's not a super large issue or anything, we could have just a Slack conversation with the dev team and get something started that way. Maybe then we could go from there to a P2 post or something where we could have a wider audience, I guess, for discussion and questions and to make sure we didn't miss anything. Then even more than that, we could actually have, like a Zoom chat or something like that with the development team and chat with them that way. So there's probably a few different ways we could do it, but essentially, it all comes back to communicating it well and making sure that we've done our homework as a support team so that when we present this issue to them, it's ready to go and they completely understand and can start, in their minds formulating, well, how are we going to actually accomplish this within Jetpack?
Yeah, you mentioned doing your homework there. How much of the homework lies on the support team versus, saying that we found this problem, we found some use cases, here, design team, development team, you go figure out the answer to that. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, should we come with an answer ready?
I think it all depends. And at least in my experience and from what we do with Jetpack and even with other things at Automatic, depending on, I guess, whatever happiness engineer might be taking the point on it, they usually take it, as far as they can. So if it were somebody like me who doesn't have a ton of development experience, but maybe a little bit, I could try to make like a proof of concept or something, even if it wasn't completely polished, and show that to the developers if I had the time to do that. Some of our teammates that might have even more, development experience, they could actually, almost make a pull request on GitHub and have almost a finished product for the developers and designers to just go in and polish up and, review the code and maybe make some tweaks to it. So I think it all depends on maybe your level of experience and also obviously your time, whether you think it's worth the time to go that far with it, or whether it's something that the development team and design team has the time for it and maybe they should spend it. So I think at least for us at Automatic, it sort of comes down to a case-by-case basis.
Carolyn, is it the same over at Buffer? Like, how much homework do you typically tell one of your support team members to do before they bring it, before they pitch that to the dev team?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because in your first question to Chase, you said, how do you present the problem and the solution? And then in your second question, you said, well, should you present the solution? And
I should have flipped those, but that's how they ended up.
So yeah, I was going to say, I would really resist suggesting a solution as much as you can. To Jeff's point about like you're taking on the user research at that point, like, so it also depends a little bit on where your company is and what stage your company's at. But now we do have a user research team, but even they don't try and understand, or they don't try and solve it. They mostly try and understand the questions that specifically that Jeff asked, which were, why is this a problem? What are you trying to achieve? How are you trying to achieve that now? What are your workarounds? Like, they really try and get a really good understanding of that. And then it is something that the product team takes on. Like, we try not to solve it. But that may also be because we generally do not have people who have experience in product. But yeah, I would say if you don't, that can be a bit limiting almost. Like, the solution sometimes that you come up with first is like, put it on the settings page, put the checkbox on the settings page. Whereas like, there are, I think, a lot of examples where resisting that first reaction and saying like, let's dive into this. I'd be really curious to hear Jeff's thoughts on this because he's now in a product role after being on this sort of support side. So yeah, on our side, we try as much as we can to resist suggesting a solution.
Thank you. I appreciate being brought into this. I totally agree with you. I think it depends on how the organization works. But what I really liked about what Chase Livingston was saying about how Automatic works is you write it out. If I was to restate kind of what he was saying, you write it out and then you write it out again, right? You kind of like write it out and you run it by a couple of people and you get some feedback on like, is that actually the problem? Like, did we really nail it here? Do we have some other use cases to back it up? And then you take that and you write it out again, maybe even in more long form with even more context around like, starting from zero of like, okay, these are our customers, just as a reminder. And now let's zoom in on this specific customer. And you really have this like full document going, almost like a user researcher would create. And then at the bottom, or wherever, you're like, and this is the problem. This is the clearest understanding of the problem that I can give you. And we've had people in the past who were real solutions thinkers. They loved the problem, but what they loved even more was solving the problem. They got such a high from it. So they would jump in the same sort of like message, right? GitHub issue or whatever. They would jump from here's the problem to here's the solution. And there's definitely a case for that, right? Like, it's really small, maybe like, oh, this copy is really misleading. Here's my attempt at like some better copy or whatever. But there's definitely a case for, I just want to state this problem. Even if I have a solution in the back of my head, I'm going to state the problem and let it sit for like a day. and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to kind of pitch my initial thoughts on it. But somehow it's separated so that no one anchors against that first solution, like Carolyn was saying. No one anchors against that and is kind of like, drafting off of that. They're all coming up with crazy different ideas. I think that as an organization, that's how we try to think a little bit more often. Doesn't always work, but I think it's pretty important. That, I guess the thing that I would say, again, like part of the responsibilities on the product team of Carolyn is trusting that if she puts problems out there, the product team will pick the ones that are the most important to solve based on all kinds of business contexts. And then it's not just like the product team solves it in isolation. Like they need to be bringing the support people into the conversation. It's just maybe they're two different conversations. One is here's a problem. I just want to state it really clearly. And then the other one is like, hey, let's talk about possible solutions to this problem. And they're just like, they're removed in some way. I don't know how much, but by at least a little bit.
Yeah, I think that removal there is the key. Like for whatever reason, like, and maybe it's a personal thing. Like if I put out here's what the customer is saying that the problem is, here's what all the research and homework that I've done says the problem is, and here's the best like picture of the core problem that I can paint. That's one thing. But I want to make sure that I followed up with, well, here's what the customer suggested as a possible option. Here's a couple of options that I thought through over the past 24, 48 hours or whatever that are possible options. Like that way, you mentioned earlier, that separation there, even if it's just like a GitHub issue message or whatever it's called at the top, and then you put the answer in another comment under it. Just something to break it up a little bit so people don't get fixated on that answer, like you pointed out. Otherwise, it's real easy to go in and go, oh yeah, settings checkbox. Absolutely. That's like the perfect idea. And that's no work and we can just do it. It'll be fine.
Right. Yeah. Jumping to, this is a whole different topic and a whole different podcast, but like jumping to really high fidelity mock-ups would be the same thing, right? If you like, as a support person, run to a designer and you're like, hey, can you make this mock-up like really high quality so that I can put it in this GitHub issue? Like that's the type of stuff that anchors people on a specific solution, as opposed to saying, I just like drew this, I drew a couple options out on this piece of paper and took a photo of it with my phone. Like I have no idea what the solution is. Here are just a couple of my ideas. Anything to frame that as like, that like disparate, like really high variety brainstorming session like that is very valuable.
One other sort of tactical thought here is I do think that we as a customer service team do often and can do justice to what the customer describes as the problem and the solution that they want. But there is magic in removing us as well. So for a tool like user voice or something like that, where customers can describe in their own words, they're talking to an open text box, they're not talking to a person. They can riff off of each other. They comment on each other's things like, oh yeah, that actually would be really useful. Like sometimes just removing the customer service team's translation of it can also be powerful, like having sort of a message board type forum where customers can just freely suggest and describe the problem. And of course they do the same thing. They probably even more so jump to this solution than describing the problem. But usually if you listen to the right and skip the first sentence or two, they talk about the problem too. So giving them an open chance to do that can also be really really useful for the product team as they're thinking through, or the research team as they're thinking through, okay, not only what was the original problem, will this solution fix it, but then I have a mock-up, who can I show this to? Like, oh, here's 40 people who literally talked about this problem, like, and took the time to suggest it. They're your target audience for somebody who's going to jump on the phone with you and spend 20 minutes going, yeah, this would solve it, or no, it wouldn't, and here's why.
A note on being like the manager involved in this situation. Like if you're managing the people who are on your support team and they're answering tickets related to this one problem all the time, and they're just like so anchored on this one solution, as the manager, you have to find a way to make them feel as if they're going to be recognized. Okay, if we adopt that idea that you had, even if you're not the one that like proposed it and then we went with it. But if you had that idea, we're going to recognize you for that. Like we're going to set it up as a culture where it's like this person and lots of other people contributed to this problem. Because a lot of times I think what drives people to that solutions thinking or that like rush to a high fidelity mock-up like in the background is they want to be seen as like the solver of the problem. And they can really create problems for themselves without noticing it by being like, yeah, you know, I spent 10 hours this week without telling anyone, like working on, you know, trying to write some like updated JavaScript and like get a developer or a designer involved to like make a high fidelity mock-up for me. But I really thought that I had the solution nailed for this one. And it just, as a manager, it's a really tricky problem. I really don't know what the answer is, but you have to find a way to make them feel like they'll still get recognized, even if they don't, even if it's not their idea that gets implemented, or even if it's not their design that gets chosen or something like that.
Yeah. So with that, how do you do it? Like, that's the manager perspective. How do you deal with that on like a personal perspective? How do you make sure that you don't just get bogged down because they didn't take your idea or whatnot? Or maybe, you know, you pitch an idea and then it turned into 5 other ideas and one of those was picked. Like, how do you deal with that from the personal side rather than the manager side?
I'll take a shot at it, but I think I think everybody else would have a better idea. For me, the thing I always have to remember is the most important thing is that our customers get their problem solved and that they're really happy with the solution. And if I'm just part of the process and it's not my idea that ends up getting chosen, but I'm really happy with what we went with, then I should be thrilled about the outcome. I should be thrilled about the process. As opposed to it can actually be quite disruptive and destructive for me to kind of go away in silence and try to work on this problem without sharing it with people and without talking about it with people. That can be really problematic. So I think just anchoring on that somehow is really, really important. I don't know how to do it, but that's where I would start.
I think part of it is the culture that your team builds. So I know, like with Basecamp, we go through so many different designs and iterations on just a single page. It's unreal sometimes. One of our interns mentioned it today, where he had worked on a page and then reworked it and reworked it and reworked it, and then put 2 weeks into it, and then that design didn't end up being the right direction, so reworked it some more. And that is like, it can be a little disheartening at first because you're like, man, I nailed it on this first idea. Like, this is right. I know it's right. But also, like, the more that you riff on an idea and go over iterations of an idea, you might find a better solution. You might not. You don't know until you actually try it. And I think that comes, like, the culture for that comes from the top down. Jason, our CEO, is really good about saying, hey, here's the problem that we're looking to solve. Here's one idea, but it's not the idea. And it might not be the right idea come tomorrow morning, but right now, here's one idea. And it's really refreshing when your CEO steps up and says, hey, this is just an idea, just like anybody else's. Like, feel free to disregard it. Feel free to throw it out. I think that sets a really good kind of culture moment for the rest of the team. Don't know if anybody else's company is like that. I'm sure everyone deals with it their own way, but that's kind of how we deal with it at Basecamp. Carolyn's giving me side eye.
I was going to say, Carolyn's had some great faces during this segment. I can't wait to do what she has to say.
Right there.
Yeah, I just feel like that's like really an ego problem. Like, I don't feel like if somebody is like obsessed with spending so much time getting it right because they don't want to share it early enough because they want to get credit for getting the answer, like, that's a totally different, that's like a personnel problem to me than a culture problem. Like, I don't know if somebody is repeatedly not excited about the ultimate solution because it wasn't their solution, or that they are not sharing early because they don't want to get scooped. That to me that's not a valid cultural problem. That's a problem with that individual. I would say, to your point, Jeff, about the much earlier thing you said about I'm excited about the customer getting the right solution. Like that, I think is legitimate, completing that circle, like bringing it back around, not just to the customer service team, but to the developers too. Sometimes don't forget that like that circle goes all the way to the developers too, of like, hey, you affected change. And that should be to the customer service team. Like you brought this up, you, instead of just like closing your computer and at 5 and saying like, sorry about ya, you took the time to submit a problem and raise it up, and like, you know, you took the time and emotion to raise this thing, and it worked. Like that is that's not so much an ego thing as a like, yeah, you have to believe that in your role, you are an important role for the company and for the customer, and you are able to effect change in your role. That I think completing that thing of like, okay, we've solved this thing, we fixed this thing because of this process or this person who raised it. Like definitely celebrate that publicly, and go all the way around to and hey, by the way, that team that worked on fixing that, like this is what happened for these customers. We let them know, here were some of their replies, or this is how much this particular tag has gone down in the support team since you fixed this issue. You know, we get 20% fewer billing emails or whatever it is. Like completing that circle is absolutely key. And that makes it fun to come in and do this every day. The one individual ego thing, I don't know. That's a different issue to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt like you were describing that, but you were also describing a number of cultural things that can, I mean, everyone has an ego. I think baking it in from the start that everyone has an ego, and as a manager, finding ways to help them get recognized, like make them realize that they're going to get recognized. I mean, Jason didn't just he didn't just like start as a CEO doing what he does now. Like he did it because he realized that otherwise he was squashing what other people were saying, because he's the CEO. And he comes out swinging saying, hey, I think we should do this. He wants to encourage dialogue, and everyone's like, yeah, it's great. Jason, let's do that. I mean, I don't know. It's such a thing that everyone has that, I don't know. I think having dealt with this a few times with great people, it's just that people have an ego, especially smart people who think they have an answer, and they really index on it. They start to see that answer as like a crucial piece of every problem that they come across. And there's like, if we just did this one thing, it would fix everything.
There's a time element here too. Like if you've been thinking about an idea for a day, yeah, you've got ownership of that idea and the answer for it and all, but that's not the same as I've seen this case week after week after week. I've talked to 20, 25 customers. I've put in so many hours and talked with other people about this idea. Like, I think this is the right answer. I think this is the right idea. You have to be able to go, all right, I put in all that time, and I still might not have the right answer. And that's part ego, that's part culture, that's part just being human and really, you know, selling your idea. You have to really take ownership of that idea and really believe in it, even if it might not be the right answer at the end.
I do think the part that Carolyn's 100% right on is if you're then like a real negative person about the ultimate solution, like if I baked that into my previous thing, like that's not what I meant at all. That person's got to go, or, you know, something. They need something serious. It's a little bit more of the person who doesn't even realize what they're doing, but they work in silence on something without opening it up to broader feedback because they really think they've got the ultimate solution. And what they want to do is show up on like the shiny white horse, like carrying the sweet broadsword. And they're like, I figured it out.
Yeah, I think that's a problem.
Oh, if that's a problem, I'd be surprised if you could hire a team.
So that's one that we're going to dig on a little bit later, because I don't want to get too far over the limit or anything else. But see, this is what happens. Like we end a show and we come up with the next topic. It's great. All right. Last thing I want to touch on real quick, just to kind of bring it back and complete that circle that Carolyn was talking about and that perfect 3-inch hole and everything else. Chase Livingston, when you've done all this, when you've done your homework, you've presented your idea, you've kind of, you know, laid out the problem and everything else, what do you do to make sure like it doesn't just stagnate? Like, how do you make sure that all this work or whatever that you've put into it doesn't just get a, oh yeah, +1, and then everyone moves on and forgets about it?
Yeah, that's really tough. I think a lot of that falls on the product team and the development team for sure, to make sure that they're constantly, reviewing what the support team and others have, brought to them, whether it's making GitHub issue sweeps every so often or something like that to make sure something doesn't get left behind. I think obviously a lot of that falls on us as the support team as well, making sure that when we do create a GitHub issue or start this conversation, that we're giving the product team as much detail as we can, so that they have what they need, and then they can just start running rather than having to do their own research on what the problem actually is and what the users are actually saying. If we don't give them that up front, then that's probably going to be an easy thing for them to say, oh yeah, I'll take a look at this as soon as I have time or something like that, because they either don't have the time or don't want to take the time to do that research that we should have done. So I think there's a lot of different ways you could go about that, but the two big things, at least for me, that come to mind from my experience, is making sure that you give them, the product team and the developers, enough detail, and then two, making sure that they have some sort of way to sweep through those open issues every so often, so that things don't fall through the cracks and get forgotten about.
Carolyn, do you think that's right? That it's just a balance between support making sure things aren't dropped and the dev team making sure things aren't dropped?
Yeah.
Does one team own it a little bit more than the other, or is it the individual? I mean, you pitched the idea, you got the conversation started. Like, should you see it through to a yes or no kind of like open close thing?
Oh gosh, we just sort of visited this so hard at Buffer.
Yay for timely, appropriate questions.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. Having the individual own it, I think, potentially goes back to, then we revisit the thing from last week of talking about pestering and following through, even though it's not coming up. I think in some ways, as a customer service team, like, it's good to follow up and make sure that you are taking care of your customer if there's something that needs to be answered, but like, there also needs to be an element of trust that when you pass it along, that and if that's consistently broken, then that process is broken. Then we as a company are not prioritizing correctly. We need more data or less data. We need to either have more numbers, or we need to be more data informed as opposed to data driven. Like, whatever that is, if we're choosing the wrong thing, then that process is broken. And we should have explored that, not necessarily like, I don't know that it should be one team's or one, especially not one person's responsibility. I feel like it's more of a process question. Is that a cop-out?
No, I think it's valid. I think we'll revisit that in like a month or so when you're like, oh no, we had it totally wrong. We're doing it this way now.
Okay.
All right, Jeff, last word, couple of minutes left. Any other thing you want to throw in on this topic?
Nope. I do not have anything to throw in on this topic. I think we've talked about it. I'm very excited about what we've talked about so far.
Awesome. So that's our take on this one. Let us know what you think. Hopefully we hit the nail on the head a little bit closer this week than we did last week. You can hit us up. hello@supportops.co is the email. We're at supportops on Twitter. Like we mentioned, if you're at SupConf, then make sure to find Jeff. He's going to be there for all day on Tuesday. I have no idea tomorrow's the 24th. So all day on March. Good Lord Almighty. All day on May 24th. And if you're listening to this episode after that, just I guess Jeff will be in Boston. So if you're in Boston and want to meet him, head there. I guess. Should we just go ahead and give out your address?
I guess go right ahead. Come and knock on my door.
Look up Wistia on Google Maps.
Thank you, Chase.
Oh, it's all right. Our listeners are awesome. You'll have great conversations. All right.
Yeah.
That's it. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again next week. But until we're back then, just go out and have an awesome week.